Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for over 15 years, and throughout that remarkable tenure, he had witnessed every imaginable family configuration compete on his stage. He had seen blended families, adoptive families, multi-generational families, and families built on bonds that transcended traditional biological connections. But nothing in his extensive experience could have prepared him for what would unfold on a Friday afternoon in May 2025, when a routine family introduction would be interrupted by a revelation so shocking and dramatic that it would stop production entirely and force everyone present to confront the devastating consequences of long-buried secrets. This is a story about truth that refuses to stay hidden, about the courage it takes to speak up when staying silent would be easier, and about why some moments demand that we put aside entertainment to acknowledge the profound pain of families torn apart by deception. If you believe that children deserve to know the truth about their origins and that honesty is the foundation of genuine family bonds, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel, because what happened next will demonstrate that DNA does not lie even when people do. The Thompson family from Memphis, Tennessee, stood on one side of the Family Feud stage, appearing to be a typical American family ready to compete and celebrate their bonds on national television. The family was led by 45-year-old David Thompson, a high school football coach who had dedicated his career to mentoring young athletes and teaching them about discipline, character, and teamwork. Standing beside him was his wife of 22 years, Monica Thompson, a 43-year-old nurse who had spent 2 decades caring for patients in the intensive care unit of a major hospital. Their children completed the team, including 20-year-old Marcus, a college sophomore playing football at a Division II school, 18-year-old Ashley, a high school senior preparing to attend nursing school, and 16-year-old Tyler, a talented athlete following in his father's footsteps. What made this family's story particularly compelling, according to the pre-show interviews, was the strength of the father-son bond between David and Marcus. David had coached Marcus throughout his youth sports career, had been his biggest supporter and toughest critic, and had shaped him into the young man and athlete he had become. Marcus spoke emotionally during the interview about how his father had taught him everything he knew about football and life, about how their relationship went beyond typical parent-child bonds to something approaching best friends who happened to also be father and son. David had tears in his eyes when talking about the pride he felt watching Marcus succeed in college, knowing that the values and skills he had instilled were paying dividends. The Thompson family had driven 8 hours from Memphis to the Family Feud studios, excited about the opportunity to compete together and to share their story with America. They had practiced common survey answers, had discussed strategy for the fast money round, and had looked forward to this as a bonding experience that would create memories to last a lifetime. What none of them could have anticipated was that this experience would indeed create lasting memories, but not the kind they had hoped for or expected. Sitting in the studio audience that day, among approximately 200 other people who had come to watch the taping, was a 44-year-old man named James Richardson. James had come to the Family Feud taping as part of a tour group visiting Los Angeles, with no particular connection to any of the families competing and no expectation that the day would be anything more than pleasant entertainment. But when the Thompson family was introduced and Steve Harvey began asking them questions about their backgrounds, James's attention was caught by something that seemed impossible yet undeniable. He was looking at Marcus Thompson, and he was seeing his own face from 20 years earlier. The resemblance was not subtle or questionable. It was the kind of unmistakable similarity that made people do double takes, that prompted strangers to ask if 2 people were related. Marcus had James's distinctive jaw structure, his exact nose shape, his particular eye configuration, even his characteristic way of tilting his head when he smiled. James sat frozen in his seat as Steve Harvey asked David Thompson about coaching his son Marcus, as Marcus talked about his father being his hero and role model, as the family celebrated their close bonds. And James Richardson knew with absolute certainty that the young man on that stage was his biological son, conceived during a brief relationship with Monica Richardson, now Monica Thompson, over 20 years earlier. James had dated Monica for approximately 6 months in the fall and winter of 2004. Their relationship had been passionate but tumultuous, marked by intense connection alternating with dramatic conflicts. When Monica had ended the relationship in February 2005, James had been hurt but had accepted her decision and had moved on with his life. He had not known that Monica was pregnant. She had never told him, had never reached out, had simply disappeared from his life entirely. James had assumed she had moved on as he had, perhaps starting fresh somewhere new or reconnecting with a previous relationship. He had never imagined that she had been carrying his child, that she had given birth to his son, or that another man had raised that son believing himself to be the biological father. The internal struggle James experienced in those moments was profound and immediate. Part of him wanted to stay silent, to avoid causing a scene or disrupting what was clearly a close and loving family. Marcus appeared happy, well-adjusted, and deeply bonded with the man he knew as his father. What right did James have to intrude on that relationship and potentially destroy it? But another part of James, the part that recognized his own genetic legacy in the young man on stage, felt an overwhelming need to speak up, to claim his biological connection, to ensure that Marcus knew the truth about his origins. The ethical considerations were complex and weighed heavily on him as he sat in that audience seat trying to decide what to do. During a commercial break, while Steve Harvey was off stage and the families were resting, James made a decision that would change multiple lives forever. He approached one of the production assistants and explained, as calmly and rationally as he could manage given the circumstances, that he believed one of the contestants on stage was his biological son, and that he had critical information that the family needed to know. The production assistant, initially skeptical and concerned that this might be some kind of attention-seeking behavior, nevertheless brought the information to the producers given the seriousness of James's demeanor and the specificity of his claim. The producers faced an immediate and difficult decision. They could dismiss James as confused or seeking attention and continue with the taping as planned. Or they could take his claims seriously and potentially expose a family to devastating information on national television. After a brief but intense consultation, they decided that if there was any possibility that James's claim was legitimate, the ethical thing to do was to address it rather than allowing the family to continue in ignorance while the truth sat in the audience waiting to emerge in some other, potentially more damaging way. Steve Harvey was informed of the situation during what was supposed to be a brief break. His reaction was immediate shock followed by deep concern for all parties involved. He asked to speak with James personally before making any decisions about how to proceed. In a private conversation away from the stage and cameras, James explained his relationship with Monica, described the timeline of their breakup and Marcus's likely conception, and detailed the physical similarities he had observed. Steve, who had been in the entertainment industry long enough to have encountered various unusual situations, recognized that James appeared sincere and that his observations about the physical resemblance were difficult to dismiss. Steve then faced one of the most difficult decisions of his career. He could return to the stage and continue the taping as if nothing had happened, allowing the Thompson family to compete and enjoy their experience while this bombshell waited in the audience. Or he could address the situation directly, potentially destroying a family's joy and exposing painful secrets, but ensuring that truth and honesty prevailed over comfortable deception. After struggling with the decision, Steve chose honesty, believing that Marcus deserved to know the truth about his biological origins, and that continuing the taping while in possession of such significant information would be its own form of deception. When Steve returned to the stage, his demeanor had changed completely. The playful energy and humor that typically characterized his hosting had been replaced by a seriousness that immediately signaled to everyone present that something was wrong. He approached the Thompson family, and the words he spoke next would initiate a sequence of events that no one could have fully anticipated or prepared for. "Folks, I need everyone's attention for a moment," Steve began, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. "Something has come to my attention during this break, and it is serious enough that I cannot in good conscience continue this taping without addressing it. What I am about to say is going to be shocking and painful, and I want to apologize in advance for the fact that this is happening in such a public setting. But the truth is important, and sometimes the truth comes out in unexpected ways and places." The Thompson family looked at Steve with growing concern and confusion. The studio audience fell completely silent, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented. Steve continued, choosing his words carefully as he tried to balance honesty with compassion. "There is a gentleman in our audience today who has approached our producers with information that directly affects your family," Steve said, looking specifically at the Thompson family. "His name is James Richardson, and he believes that he is Marcus's biological father." He has described a relationship with Monica that occurred over 20 years ago, and he has observed physical similarities between himself and Marcus that he finds impossible to ignore. I am bringing this to your attention because if there is any truth to this claim, then Marcus deserves to know, and all of you deserve the opportunity to address this situation rather than having it remain hidden. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. David Thompson's face went from confusion to comprehension to absolute devastation as he processed what Steve had just said. Monica Thompson went pale, and her hands began shaking uncontrollably, her reaction confirming what everyone was beginning to suspect even before any words were spoken. Marcus looked from Steve to his mother to his father, his expression showing the particular confusion and fear that comes when your entire understanding of your identity is suddenly called into question. Ashley and Tyler, the younger siblings, looked terrified and lost, unsure what was happening but sensing that their family was falling apart in real time. "That is ridiculous," David said, but his voice lacked conviction and his eyes were locked on his wife, searching her face for denial that was not coming. "This is some kind of sick joke or mistake. Monica, tell everyone that this is not true." Monica could not speak. She stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her silence more powerful than any confession. Marcus, watching his mother's reaction and seeing the truth in her inability to deny what had been claimed, took a step backward as if physically recoiling from the revelation. "Mom, is it true?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking. "Is Coach Dad not my real father? Have you been lying to me my entire life?" Steve, recognizing that the situation was spiraling and that the family needed privacy rather than continuing to have this confrontation in front of cameras and audience, made an immediate decision. "We are stopping this taping right now. Everyone needs to clear the stage except for the Thompson family and Mr. Richardson. Turn off the cameras. Give these people some privacy to deal with this situation. Clear the audience and the set now." The production team moved quickly to evacuate the audience and to shut down the official cameras, though backup systems continued recording for legal protection. James Richardson was brought to the stage area, and for the first time in over 20 years, he came face to face with Monica. The recognition between them was immediate and undeniable, confirming that they did indeed have a shared history. The conversation that followed was raw, painful, and life-altering for everyone involved. Monica, finally forced to confront the secret she had kept for over 2 decades, broke down and confessed that David was not Marcus's biological father. She explained that she had discovered she was pregnant shortly after breaking up with James, had panicked about single motherhood, and had reconnected with David, an ex-boyfriend who had wanted to marry her. She had allowed David to believe he was the father, had married him quickly, and had spent 20 years maintaining that lie while building what appeared to be a happy family. David Thompson's world shattered completely. The son he had raised, coached, mentored, and loved for 20 years was not biologically his. The wife he had trusted completely had built their entire marriage on a foundational lie. Every moment of Marcus's childhood, every football game David had coached, every piece of fatherly advice he had given, all of it was now recontextualized by this revelation. His pain was visceral and overwhelming, made worse by the public nature of the revelation, and by the fact that a stranger sitting in the audience had known the truth just by looking at Marcus when David himself had apparently been too trusting or too blind to see. Marcus experienced a different kind of devastation, the particular trauma of discovering that your entire identity was based on deception. The man he had called Dad his entire life, the man he had patterned himself after, and whose approval he had sought in everything, was not his biological father. And his biological father, a complete stranger named James Richardson, had been absent from his life not by choice, but because he had never been told he had a son. Marcus struggled to process feelings of betrayal toward his mother, confusion about his relationship with David, and complex emotions about this stranger who shared his DNA but had no shared history or relationship. James Richardson, thrust suddenly into fatherhood of a 20-year-old son he had never known existed, experienced his own overwhelming emotions. He felt anger at Monica for denying him the opportunity to be part of his son's life, grief for the 20 years of childhood and development he had missed, and uncertainty about how to navigate a relationship with a young adult who was biologically his son, but who had no reason to see him as a father figure. He also felt guilt for having disrupted what appeared to be a close family, even though the disruption came from revealing truth rather than from malicious intent. Steve Harvey remained with the family throughout this initial confrontation, serving not as a host or entertainer, but as a facilitator and occasional mediator when emotions threatened to escalate beyond productive conversation. He helped ensure that everyone had the opportunity to speak and be heard, that the immediate shock and pain did not lead to decisions or statements that people would regret, and that practical next steps were identified for how the family could navigate the aftermath of this revelation. The immediate practical question that arose was whether James's claim could be verified through DNA testing before any permanent decisions or relationship changes were made based purely on physical resemblance and Monica's confession. While Monica's admission provided strong confirmation, DNA testing would provide scientific certainty. Arrangements were made for Marcus, David, and James to all undergo DNA testing through a laboratory that could provide expedited results. The testing occurred within days, and when the results returned, they confirmed what everyone already knew. James Richardson was Marcus Thompson's biological father. David Thompson, who had raised Marcus from birth, had no biological connection to the son he loved. The aftermath of this revelation unfolded over months and years, affecting every member of the extended family in profound ways. David and Monica's marriage did not survive. The foundation of trust had been destroyed not just by the initial deception, but by the 22 years of continued lying. David filed for divorce, and the proceedings were bitter and painful, with David expressing not just betrayal about paternity, but anger about being denied the choice of whether to raise another man's child as his own. Monica's defense that she had been young, scared, and desperate provided context, but did not excuse the magnitude or duration of her deception. The most complex relationships to navigate were those involving Marcus. His relationship with David, the only father he had ever known, was deeply damaged but not destroyed. They eventually rebuilt a connection based on the 20 years of shared history, with David acknowledging that regardless of biology, he had been Marcus's father in every meaningful sense, and that Marcus would always be his son in his heart. But the relationship was forever changed, weighted with pain and loss that could be managed but never fully eliminated. Marcus's relationship with James Richardson developed slowly and cautiously. They met multiple times to talk, to learn about each other, and to begin building some form of connection. James was careful not to try to replace David or to claim a fatherly role he had not earned through years of presence and care. Instead, he offered himself as another adult in Marcus's life who cared about him and wanted to support him, while acknowledging that the relationship would need to develop organically over time rather than being forced by biological connection alone. The impact on Ashley and Tyler, Marcus's younger siblings, was also significant. DNA testing revealed that they were indeed David's biological children, which meant that Marcus was their half-brother rather than their full sibling. This revelation altered family dynamics and created questions about inheritance, about family identity, and about how to maintain sibling bonds when the biological foundation had changed. Both younger children struggled with anger at their mother for the deception and with complex feelings about their relationship with Marcus. Steve Harvey processed his own role in these events over time. He gave interviews discussing the ethical dilemmas he had faced, the decision to reveal the information rather than ignore it, and his belief that truth, however painful, was ultimately more important than comfortable ignorance. He acknowledged that he did not know whether he had made the right decision, but that he had made the decision that felt most honest, and that gave Marcus the information he deserved to have about his own origins. The incident sparked broader conversations about paternity, about the rights of biological fathers to know about their children, about the ethics of paternity deception, and about how to handle situations where long-held beliefs about family relationships are discovered to be false. Legal experts discussed whether men who unknowingly raise children who are not biologically theirs should have recourse for the financial and emotional investments made based on deception. Therapists discussed how to help families navigate the trauma of such revelations and how to support children whose identities are disrupted by paternity discoveries. Several years after the Family Feud incident, Marcus Thompson gave an interview discussing his experience and the journey of rebuilding his identity and his family relationships. He spoke about the initial devastation of learning the truth, the anger he had felt toward his mother, the confusion about his relationship with both David and James, and the slow process of finding a path forward. He described how he had eventually come to see David as his father in the truest sense, the man who had raised him and shaped him, while also developing a meaningful adult relationship with James based on mutual respect and growing connection. He talked about forgiving his mother, understanding the complexity of the situation she had faced as a young woman, while also acknowledging that her choices had caused profound harm that affected multiple generations. Monica Thompson also eventually spoke publicly about her experience, not to justify her actions, but to acknowledge the harm she had caused and to explain the thought process that had led to her decisions. She described the fear and desperation she had felt as a young pregnant woman, the rationalization she had used to convince herself that the lie was acceptable because David loved her and wanted to be a father, and the way the deception had become harder to reverse with each passing year as more time and relationship history accumulated. She expressed deep remorse for the pain she had caused to David, to Marcus, to James, and to her other children, and acknowledged that her choices had consequences that extended far beyond what she had imagined when she had made them over 20 years earlier. The story became a cautionary tale about the long-term consequences of deception, about how secrets maintained through years of lies eventually surface in unexpected and often painful ways, and about how the truth, regardless of when it emerges, must be dealt with and processed. It was discussed in ethics courses, in family therapy sessions, and in conversations about honesty and integrity in relationships. As this complex and painful story reaches its conclusion, several profound lessons emerge about truth, identity, and the foundations of family bonds. Children deserve to know the truth about their biological origins, both for practical medical reasons and for the fundamental human need to understand one's own identity and heritage. Deception, even when initially motivated by fear or by a desire to protect, creates damage that compounds over time and affects multiple generations. Fatherhood is not purely biological, but is also built through years of presence, care, teaching, and love. Truth eventually emerges regardless of how carefully secrets are guarded, and the manner of that emergence can make the pain significantly worse. When long-held beliefs about family relationships are revealed to be false, healing requires time, professional support, and a willingness to rebuild relationships on new and more honest foundations. Steve Harvey's decision to stop the taping and to facilitate the revelation rather than ignore, it demonstrated a commitment to truth and to human dignity that transcended his role as an entertainer. His choice to prioritize the long-term well-being of the people involved, particularly Marcus's right to know the truth about his origins, over the commercial interests of completing a television episode, showed moral courage and ethical clarity in a situation with no perfect options. If this story moved you, if you believe in the importance of truth and honesty in family relationships, and in the right of children to know their true biological heritage, make sure to like and subscribe. These are the stories that remind us that DNA does not lie even when people do, that secrets always carry a cost, and that building our families on foundations of truth and authenticity is the only way to create bonds that can truly endure even when tested by difficult revelations.